J.K. Rowling fit so much into the 7 Harry Potter books and made it super complicated at times, whether it be in-depth backstories for minor or side characters, or plots that start out in the very first book and play out in the final 7th book. However, there are a fair few storylines that Rowling just completely cut. Welcome to Movie Flame. I'm Morgan Ross, and today I'm going to take a look at this article that was made by CBR, and it's titled 10 Abandoned Harry Potter Storylines That Were Cut from the Books. I'm just gonna go through the article and sort of react and give my thoughts as we go. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing. It will greatly help to grow and sustain the channel. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, and you can also follow me on all of my other social media pages, all of which are linked down below, and all of which house similar content that I make here on this channel. Now, let's look at this article. This is gonna be fun. So number 10, the Mopsis character was removed from the story. The Seer character was reworked into Sybil Trelawney. This is one that I actually haven't heard before, so I'm kind of excited to dive in. There were a few characters from the early drafts of Harry Potter that didn't make it to the final version of the novels. One of these characters is a man named Mopsis, a blind wizard who would have had the gift of sight. So I know that Mopsis is actually a wizard seer that was created in mythology years ago. Like, that's not something that Rowling came up with. She does that a lot though. The name Mopsis comes from Greek mythology. Yeah, I should have just kept reading. Being one of the famous seers. The character was likely reworked into Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor at Hogwarts. Rowling first mentioned Mopsis in a 2005 interview, stating that many of the character's traits were given to Mad-Eye Moody. Interesting. I guess the whole blind side kind of goes with the magical eye. Mopsis didn't make it into the final version of the story because he would have been too powerful. While Trelawney's predictions were much more sporadic and unpredictable, Mopsis would have been a competent, consistent fortune teller, which would have made Harry's life too easy, having too much access to answers about the future. Yeah, I mean, Sybil Trelawney only made 2 real predictions, which was the prophecy about Harry and Voldemort, and then the one in Prisoner of Azkaban where she predicted that Wormtail would return and then return to his master Voldemort and make him come back. And I don't want to hear any of that crap about the fan theories where they say that Sybil Trelawney actually had a bunch of predictions if you look at this more closely. J.K. Rowling specifically said in an actual article that she sat down and wrote about Sybil Trelawney, saying that those were the only true prophecies that she ever told. Alright, moving on. Number 9. Florean Fortescue played a bigger role in Deathly Hallows. The ice cream vendor initially relayed crucial information to Harry. So this one I did actually know, and I know that Rowling said, "Oh, I killed him unnecessarily and I feel badly about that." Florean Fortescue was introduced in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban as the owner of an ice cream parlor in Diagon Alley, who would help Harry with his history of magic homework during his summer at the Leaky Cauldron. That's actually one of my favorite chapters, to be honest, where Harry is just at the Leaky Cauldron and then he's allowed to do whatever he wants. He goes into Diagon Alley a bunch of times and he sees the firebolt. It's just a great chapter. And also it is important that he helped Harry with history of magic homework, because if he relays information to Harry, he knows a lot about the history of the wizarding world. But anyway, in the Deathly Hallows, Fortescue is mentioned as having gone missing, being presumed killed by the Death Eaters. Originally, however, Fortescue had a larger place in the story. In early drafts for the Deathly Hallows, Harry and his friends would have rescued Fortescue from Malfoy Manor the same way they had with Garrick Ollivander and Luna Lovegood. They're not going to mention Dean Thomas, who was also there in the book. Fortescue was meant to help Harry by giving him information on the Elder Wand and Ravenclaw's lost diadem, with his historical knowledge set up in the Prisoner of Azkaban. However, in the final version of the story, Harry receives this information from characters like Ollivander and Xenophilius Lovegood. Honestly, I feel like I kind of like what she did in the end better, because who better to give information on the Elder Wand than Garrick Ollivander himself? But anyway, moving on. Number 8, the opening chapter was quite different. Early drafts of the first chapter included Hermione's parents. This is actually one that I found out about pretty recently, so I don't know too much about it, so I'm excited to look and see what this is. Harry Potter fans will be very familiar with the opening chapter of the series The Boy Who Lived, which followed the average day of Vernon Dursley before Albus Dumbledore placed baby Harry on the Dursleys' doorstep. One thing that I'll say about that is I'm pretty excited that they are actually filming Vernon Dursley's day for the new show. That's going to be really fun to watch, and it's honestly pretty book accurate. I made a video about that. But getting back to it, However, this was not the original opening chapter to the series. Rowling has stated that there were many different versions of the opening chapter, but felt that many of them gave too much of the story away too early. In one of those early drafts, the Potters were hiding on an island close to the shore. They were betrayed to Voldemort by an unnamed Muggle rather than Peter Pettigrew. I don't know how I feel about that one. I feel like Peter Pettigrew being the betrayer is one of the most fascinating parts of the series. Hermione Granger's parents were actually good friends to the Potters in this draft. Interesting. So I guess they were good friends with a wizarding family? I'm not really sure how that worked. Did they know that the Potters were wizards, or did they think they were Muggles? I don't know. That's interesting. But anyway, going back a little bit, Hermione Granger's parents were actually good friends to the Potters in this draft. Mr. and Mrs. Granger heard the explosion from the Potters' house, and they went there to find baby Harry in the ruins. The Granger's place in this story was given to Rubeus Hagrid in the final version, which I think was the right thing to do. Hagrid finding Harry was perfect. It also intrigues me that the Grangers actually had a much larger part in the story, because they were kind of thrown aside throughout the entire series. Like, Hermione would come home for the summer and then be like, actually, I'm not going to stay with you guys for too long. I'm going to go to the Weasleys' house. And there was that one time where she was supposed to go skiing with her parents, but then she dipped early. Like, Hermione was barely with her parents at all. She would much rather be in the Wizarding World or with Ron's family and Harry. I don't know. I just think that's weird. And I know a lot of people have talked about that. Number 7. Hogwarts originally had a vampire professor. Vampires originally played a bigger role in the story. So I know that we had that one vampire at Slughorn's dinner party, which is actually pictured right here. While vampires are not too present in the Harry Potter novels, they are mentioned to be part of the Wizarding World. In early drafts of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, there was originally a vampire professor at Hogwarts called Trokar, though what subject he taught wasn't yet planned by the time he was removed from the story. For a while, many fans theorized that Severus Snape was a vampire. I knew that they were going to bring that up as soon as I saw the mention of a vampire. Many fans theorized that Severus Snape was a vampire, being described as looking like a large bat several times throughout the 7 novels. However, this never came to be, with Rowling feeling that there was already so much done with vampires in literature that she had very little new to add to the lore. I respect that. A vampire character was introduced in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Sanguini, who was a guest at Horace Slughorn's Christmas party, which I mentioned earlier. 6. Theodore Nott had more characterization. Draco Malfoy's friend and classmate had more depth in the early drafts. Throughout Harry's time at Hogwarts, he deals with the constant annoyance of Draco Malfoy and his gang of Slytherins, including Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, and Pansy Parkinson. However, a minor Slytherin character was mentioned in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix named Theodore Nott. So Theodore Nott, his father was actually a Death Eater, because there was a Death Eater named Theodore Nott. Theodore was present in the novels previously, but went mostly unnamed, with fans believing he was the unnamed Slytherin boy who could see Thestrals during the Care of Magical Creatures class on the mysterious creatures. In early drafts, however, Theodore was a much bigger character. Rowling intended for Goblet of Fire to include a scene in which Theodore and his father, a Death Eater, visited Malfoy Manor. Theodore was meant to be an equal to Malfoy, a contrast to Crabbe and Goyle, who were basically mindless bodyguards to Malfoy throughout the novels. I'm a little bit intrigued by that idea. Would Draco still be like the top dog in Slytherin? Like, would Pansy Parkinson still be like, oh my god, Draco? If there was another kid on the block, it might really change Draco's character. Theodore was also meant to be a member of the Slug Club and Half-Blood Prince due to his connection to his famous uncle, but this storyline ended up going to Blaise Zabini. That one doesn't really make sense because Slughorn didn't invite Draco because his dad was a Death Eater, and Theodore Nott's dad was also a Death Eater. So I can't see Slughorn inviting him to his club. If HBO wants to differentiate their adaptation, Theodore Nott's characterization could easily be included, with the scene in which Theodore visits Malfoy Manor being a good opening to the 4th season, giving some interesting Slytherin perspective to the story and setting up their fathers as Death Eaters. I highly disagree with that. I think that the 4th season should always open up with the first chapter in the 4th book, which has to do with Voldemort. Especially because that chapter sets every single thing in the Goblet of Fire up. Because the Goblet of Fire is a mystery story, and that first chapter is what started all of that. I guess you could have 2 chapters before you got to Harry like the Half-Blood Prince did, but Harry was also dreaming about the first chapter and woke up, which led right into Harry's story. So you would actually have to put this Malfoy Manor scene as the first chapter, and I don't know, I just don't like that. Number 5. There was going to be a Slytherin Weasley. Goblet of Fire originally introduced a Slytherin Weasley cousin. I did know about this one. Let's go through it. Every Weasley introduced in Harry Potter ended up going into Gryffindor house. However, in early drafts of the Goblet of Fire, there was going to be a Weasley sorted into Slytherin. Her name was Mafalda. Oh, okay. So Rowling actually ended up giving that name Mafalda to Mafalda Hopkirk in the Deathly Hallows, one of the people that the trio used to break into the Ministry. But anyway, her name was Mafalda, introduced as an 11-year-old witch spending the summer with the Weasleys. Mafalda would have been the daughter of Molly's squib accountant cousin, mentioned in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, meaning her last name would have been Pruitt rather than Weasley. I will always remember that line from Ron about the accountant, so hey, it would be cool to incorporate that. Also, Pruitt is Molly Weasley's maiden name, and Pruitt also connects us to her brothers Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, 2 people part of the original Order of the Phoenix during the First Wizarding War, and they died heroes' deaths fighting the Death Eaters. I've always loved that story, so it would be cool to see more of the Pruitts in the books. Although I'm not really sure if this is the way to do it. But let's read on. Mafalda was going to be a very unpleasant child and an academic rival to Hermione. Man, that could lead to some great competition. I would be interested to see how Hermione steps up to that. Honestly, I feel like no one can beat Hermione. Like, she has a photographic memory. I feel like Hermione would win. But getting back to it, her place in Slytherin could have been very interesting, as she would have been a spy for Harry, giving him information on the Death Eaters she would have heard from their children in the Slytherin common room. Whew, okay. Eventually, Mafalda was cut from the story, with Rowling saying that Rita Skeeter was a much better source of information, being an adult reporter rather than a first-year Hogwarts student. However, had Mafalda been included, it's highly likely that she would have joined Dumbledore's army, which would have given Slytherin House a more nuanced characterization in the novels. So she would have been the only Slytherin student to join Dumbledore's army. And there's always a lot of talk about how the housing system is messed up and Slytherin is kind of given a bad rep and is almost kind of forced into being the bad people. So yeah, having Mafalda and Slytherin, it might have softened Slytherin in the eyes of many people a bit. I will say though, I am glad that Rowling did not add this. I just don't think it would fit in well, and I think it would kind of change the whole dynamic of the entire series, really. And especially changing the Weasleys, who were always known as blood traitors and were all Gryffindor. Moving on to number 4, Dudley initially had a magical child in the epilogue. Early drafts of the final chapter included Harry's Muggle cousin. This one I definitely knew about. And there is the theory that his wife and the mother of his children was Cho Chang. But that's just a fan theory. I'm curious if they're going to mention that. Much of Harry's childhood and summers were spent tormented by the Dursleys. His cousin Dudley had a very interesting arc throughout the series, starting off as a bully to Harry, with the two parting on decent terms in Deathly Hallows, implying that Dudley and his cousin could have had a better relationship in the future. In early drafts of the Deathly Hallows epilogue, however, Dudley made a reappearance. In these early drafts, Dudley was going to be on platform 9 3/4, dropping off his Muggle-born child for their year at Hogwarts. This could have been a very interesting ending for the character, growing up being told to hate magic and ending up having a magical child. This also could have added something interesting to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Hate that play. With Albus Severus Potter having a Muggle-born Dursley cousin at the school with him. I think this definitely would have been cool, and honestly, if it had been included, I wouldn't be too mad. I think it might actually fit in well. But in deeper lore past the books, we do know that Harry and Dudley did have a relationship after the Deathly Hallows, as they got their kids together every year, and J.K. Rowling said that Harry and Dudley just sat there awkwardly and sort of silently, which I think is spot on. But yeah, having Dudley have a magical child, I wonder how Petunia and Vernon would react to that. Would they treat their nephew the same way that they treated Dudley, spoiling him and giving him whatever he wanted if he was a wizard or she was a wizard? I don't know. That's something to think about. Alright, number 3. Hermione Granger originally had a Muggle sister. Hermione is introduced in the Harry Potter novels as the only child of Muggle dentists. However, Rowling intended to give Hermione a younger sister who would not be a witch. This could have been a very interesting dynamic, mirroring the relationship between Lily Potter and Petunia Dursley. Well, even if she did have a sister, I don't think that it would get to the level of Lily and Petunia. That was like as bad as it can get. It would be hard to beat that. But moving on, while the first few novels were written with the idea of Hermione having a sister, Rowling ended up excluding her from the final version of the story. By the time Rowling intended to include her, she felt that it was too late to introduce her, with Hermione never mentioning a sister in the already published novels. Okay, so one big thing to take away from that is that J.K. Rowling might have written the first, second, and possibly even the third book with the idea in her head that Hermione had this sister. Because she does say that it felt too late to introduce her because she never mentioned the sister in the already published novels. So I guess that character was taken out in the middle of the series. Number 2. Arthur Weasley was going to die in Order of the Phoenix. This one I actually did know. The Harry Potter series featured many major character deaths, including Sirius Black and Albus Dumbledore. However, many fans might be surprised to learn that Arthur Weasley was originally intended to die in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I guess he would have been killed by Nagini the Snake when he was attacked in the Hall of Prophecies. In the published version of the novel, Arthur is attacked by Voldemort's snake Nagini and the Department of Mysteries hospitalizing him. So yeah, what I just said. Fortunately, he made a full recovery, but this attack originally killed him in the early drafts. Rowling decided to save Arthur because she felt that he was one of the few good father figures in the story. That's definitely true. And it would have changed the dynamics of the Weasley family too much, and would certainly have seriously changed Ron's arc. Rowling knew she wanted a parental figure to die, however. Jesus. And so, in exchange for Arthur's life, Remus Lupin was killed. Damn. Rowling took those deaths seriously, like she wanted to really have consequences in this series. And by taking Lupin, and with him Tonks, it also led to Teddy Lupin being an orphan and repeating the cycle that Harry had, Teddy's parents dying during the Second Wizarding War, while Harry's parents died in the First Wizarding War, both fighting for the Order of the Phoenix. So yeah, I think I do like Remus Lupin dying instead, and Arthur dying, dude. Can you imagine the repercussions that would have? She did ultimately end up taking Weasley's life, that being Fred, which is probably the most tragic death in the entire series. Okay, number 1. Dean Thomas was a bigger character. HBO's adaptation could give Dean the depth he had in early drafts of the novels. This one I certainly knew about because I actually made an entire video about this. Dean Thomas was introduced in the Harry Potter novels as a Gryffindor classmate of Harry, sharing a dormitory with him throughout his time at Hogwarts. However, Dean had a much bigger arc in the early drafts of the novels, being initially named Gary Thomas. Thank God she did not go with that, dude. Gary Thomas? Getting back to it, Dean was going to be a big presence in the books, comparable to Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood. In Deathly Hallows, when Dean goes on the run from the Ministry of Magic for his Muggle heritage, he reveals that he does not know whether or not his father was a wizard. In early drafts, it was confirmed that his father was in fact a wizard, having left Dean and his mother during the First Wizarding War to protect them from Death Eaters. And it doesn't look like this article is going to mention it, but when he went off to protect them, he was killed. While this arc was not included in the final version of the story, it could certainly be included in the HBO adaptation, as it does not contradict the canon story in any way, only adding more backstory and depth to one of the few black characters in the Harry Potter novels. And I actually really agree about that. In the video that I made for this, I did pitch the idea and say that the HBO, which might be a Netflix show now, should definitely put Dean Thomas's backstory in to give it a different feel to the books and certainly a different feel to the movies, and let it add more depth to the TV show. But yeah, that's the end of the article, and this was definitely a fun read, and I'm glad I got to react to it and give my thoughts on it. But now I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these plot lines that were cut from the books. Do you wish that any of them were incorporated, or were there ones that you were glad that did not make it into the books? I'm excited to hear your thoughts. That's all I have for you guys today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.